So show of hands, who's heard of the Battle of Springfield? Okay, just about everybody. That's good. That's good. I'm going to try and talk loudly so they can pick me up here because I like to wander. And who likes maps? Oh, you're in for it tonight. Today. We've got a lot of maps. I apologize in advance because I tend to go down rabbit holes. I go down rabbit holes with research, go down rabbit holes in this presentation, meaning when something's cool and I want you to know about it, I'm gonna go down that path. So I apologize if I get off track, but we're gonna focus today on 1780, which was an important year here in northern New Jersey. And the Forgotten Victory Trail covers the battles of Springfield, Connecticut Farms, and Elizabethtown. So I'm dressed in the 3rd New Jersey Continental Regiment uniform. That was not my ancestor Jehiel Day's uniform. He was militia, so he would have been dressed quite differently. But this was the closest thing I could find other than, getting assorted, ordinary folk outfits that the militia would wear. But Jehiel Day was my 5th great-grandfather. He lived out near the Great Swamp in Morris County. And he was born in 1758. He signed up, he was forced to sign up to fight in 1776 at the age of 18. So everybody between the ages of 15 and 50 were required to do their militia service. And he signed up. Soon after that, a number of his family members in the smallpox epidemic of 1776-77 out in Morristown fell victim and died. So he lost a father, a stepmother, a stepsister, and a brother, all to smallpox. So it was rampant out in Morristown and the surrounding areas. And I won't go into it, but Washington had a plan for inoculation that he implemented for his troops that were camped out in that area. So he fought at the Battle of Springfield, which is why I have him here. I want to pay tribute to him, but I also want him to tie into the Battle of Springfield, which we're going to talk about. So later in life, his wife dies, he moves out to Ohio, dies of cholera at 1833. What I wanted to tie this into, this is a rabbit hole, his uncle was John Day. Does anybody know John Day's significance? Well, Chatham, before it was called Chatham, was John Day's bridge. So he was one of the first settlers of that area, which was just past the Short Hills Mall and in Chatham. So his uncle was John Day, and they were some of the first settlers of that area. It was known as John Day's Bridge. And there's a plaque, if you go across the bridge into downtown Chatham, off of Morris Turnpike, you'll see signs that say John Day's Bridge. So in addition to Jehiel, I had 5 other ancestors that were direct ancestors. I had a lot of cousins and uncles and things like that, direct ancestors that were at the Revolution. One of which, surprisingly, I found was a Hessian. He was captured at the Battle of Saratoga, and then at that point in the war, Washington said, the British are sending troops back to fight, which was against the rules of war. So if you were a captive and you were exchanged, you would often have to go back. You'd have to cease fighting. Well, the British weren't abiding by that, so then what they did was they made prisoners indentured servants for the duration of the war. So this gentleman, his name was Johann Luke, who was a great-grandfather of mine. He gets put up in a house in Vermont with one of the captain's families in the militia, and he falls in love with the daughter. They run off, they get married. So I've got 1 Hessian and 5 American patriots. So this is the part where you were asking about how I came into this. Well, I retired like 12 years ago, and I had to find meaning in life. And I always loved the Civil War. And I grew up, my dad was a Civil War buff. And we had a Volkswagen bus, like an old 1969 Volkswagen camper with a pop top. We used to go to visit Civil War battlefields. So I had a passion for that from those days. And in retirement, I'm like, I gotta look into my ancestry. So I started doing it, and my surname is not Anglo-Saxon Protestant. It's Gula, G-U-L-A, and it's Eastern Bloc. It's Polish. So, 3 of my grandparents are Eastern Bloc Polish. Came over late 19th century, early 20th century. The one that's not is this line through my grandmother, who's a Beach, B-E-A-C-H. And Grandma Gula, Nana we call her, she would always say, "You're Irish, you're Irish." Well, her mom was Irish, Catholic, Quichen. Her dad was Beach. She would say nothing about the English side of her roots, but she would always talk about the Irish side. And she took us to Ireland multiple times on adventures. Well, about the time I retired, she was in her late 90s, and she was senile, and unfortunately I couldn't get anything out of her about the Beach side of the family, but I did research, and it ends up I got all these ties back to the Mayflower, Plantagenet Kings, and unfortunately my grandmother passed about 10 years ago at the age of 97, and she didn't know any of this. Or at least if she did, she kept secrets. So there's my passion. I put this slide up because we talk about the participation of military in these battles, militia, continental soldiers. We talk about the impacts to citizens. But one thing we skip over sometimes is the impact of Presbyterian ministers. It was huge. So remember, we're just coming out at this period. It's the mid 1700s, and you had the Enlightenment. You had these philosophers like Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau, who impacted and influenced Jefferson and Paine, right, in their writings. And they were all about these things like natural rights, separation of powers, independence, freedom. So they were all about rights given to us by God, not by a king. And that influenced the writings of Jefferson and Paine. And locally, the guys up top were in the center of this. So these are pastors. Reverend Caldwell, most of you probably know. Reverend James Caldwell. Jacob Green, he was out of Hanover. He was a Presbyterian minister. Timothy Johns, very important, out of Morristown. He's a pastor at the First Presbyterian Church out there. And Alexander McWhirter out of Newark. So these gentlemen took risks by sermonizing about these principles of freedom, independence, natural rights, and they motivated the populace to act in conjunction with those values and to be rebels and to be part of the fight for independence. So I like to put that up there because there's some very interesting stories about those reverends. And they were what's called the New Light Presbyterians, because they were part of this new vision of, this enlightened vision of what it meant to be a person of God. So this screen, I hope everybody can see this. If you can't, as Jennifer mentioned, you could go to YouTube, watch it again, because I'm going to have a lot of maps. A lot of maps and a lot of details, and you'd be better off seeing it on a larger screen. This is, I listed out some of the major battles that we hear about all the time, right? So we hear about Lexington and Concord, we hear about, in New Jersey, we hear about Trenton, Princeton, Saratoga, up in New York. But we hear very little about the New Jersey battles. So the ones in red are ones in New Jersey. The ones I want to highlight, the first thing is First Battle of Springfield, which is a relatively unknown battle. And that took place in December 1776. We're going to talk about it later. The 10 Crucial Days, you probably heard about that. That was when Washington was successful at Trenton, Princeton, in a series of battles within 10 days. And then, this is something, has anybody heard of the Forage Wars? The Forage Wars. Picture this. The British have taken over New York, Manhattan, Staten Island, Long Island. So that's 1776, summer into fall. They're occupying New York City. They need much of Manhattan burns to the ground. There's lack of supplies coming in to British loyalists who are now in New York. They flee to New York from New Jersey into New York because the British now occupy it. They lack for food. Their horses lack for hay and things like that. So what the British have to do is they have to forage, meaning they have to go find supplies. They have to rob and steal and plunder in the surrounding areas. So they attack a number of places in New Jersey. Some of these have old names like Quibbletown, which I think is Piscataway, Spanktown, that's Rahway. So many more of these happened, but it was early in 1777 during the occupation, early occupation of New York by the British. The British will continue to forest throughout their 7 years in New York City, but it's a high concentration of foraging here. The militia for New Jersey, the rebel militia, will come out in defense of the area during the foraging. And this one is the Battle of the Short Hills, which was right down the street from y'all. Right down, yeah, Scotch Plains area. So that's not to be confused with Short Hills, New Jersey. That was Metuchen, Plainfield, Boundbrook, down that way. If you know Plainfield Country Club, Plainfield Golf Club, battles took place on that actual golf course. We're not going to get into the Battle of the Short Hills, although we'll touch on it. So on this slide, more New Jersey. The things I want to focus you on, two things. One, these are the ones we're going to talk about. 1780, from January to June, a significant activity in the area that we call the Forgotten Victory Trail. And then below this line, you can see Yorktown occurs in October 1781. After Yorktown, and this was ignored by Ken Burns, you had these in New Jersey. These are small-scale fighting, a lot of loyalist versus patriot activity on the Jersey Shore. So the Jersey Shore was ripe with privateering. So British supply ships would be attacked, American ships would be attacked by British, back and forth. And there was considerable loyalist activity. They were called refugees. And they hung out in the Pine Barrens, attacked patriot houses, patriot leaders. So a number of things happened, and I want to point this out because these are places you can go see that few people know about. And they're very important. The most important is Toms River Blockhouse. There was a raid by British and loyalists in 1782, okay, after Yorktown. There's a raid. They take captive a patriot leader named Joshua Huddy. The British take him, and a loyalist group of soldiers hang him. Now Washington's peeved. He hears about Captain Huddy being hung, and he wants retaliation. So he takes a British officer that's already captive, and they draw lots, and they pick one, and he's to be hung in retaliation. Well, it becomes an international affair, because remember, they're negotiating the Treaty of Paris at the time. So it becomes this international affair. It ends up, this British officer is from a very prominent family in England. His mother petitions the French king, and the French king petitions on behalf of this soldier, and he eventually is freed. But what it does is it delays the Treaty of Paris and the true end of the war by, probably another year. So little do people know about the Toms River Blockhouse, and Ken Burns didn't say anything about it. The other thing that you can see, so there's a memorial in Toms River where you can visit where the blockhouse was. The Long Beach Island Massacre, that's another unknown story. So on Long Beach Island, during all this privateering, some American soldiers capture a British vessel. They take the booty, they put it on the beaches of Long Beach Island, which is there's nobody on there at this time in 1700s. They sleep overnight. During the night, British loyalists come and murder them in their sleep. 21 of them. So you can visit, there's a monument to that on Long Beach Island. And last but not least, Cedar Bridge. There's fighting that occurs. Cedar Bridge Tavern, and it's on the bottom right on this slide. That's in the Pine Barrens, just south of Forked River. So if you know the Jersey Shore, you just keep going south. It's at the entry of the Pine Barrens, and this will be the last land fighting in the American Revolution at Cedar Bridge, and it's restored to its past glory, the house and the inn, and it's another one of those things that you think Ken Burns might mention, that the last land fighting took place in New Jersey, in the Pine Barrens at Cedar Bridge. So, by some counts, there was over 700 battle skirmishes and clashes in New Jersey. It constituted about 40% of George Washington's time being spent in New Jersey, of the entirety. So more than any other state, he spent time here. It was important strategically because of New York, Philadelphia, and the route to get between the two, other than on a boat. Another cool map, I won't bore you with this, but this, if you ever have an interest in knowing all of the individual battles, these are each battles. And the guide lists it along with dates. And it's part of a book by David Munn. More maps. Told you there'd be a lot of maps. Well, this one, I wanted to highlight the area we're talking about today, so Forgotten Victory Trail. This is where, down here is where that Cedar Bridge thing is. It's right around here. Tom's River Blockhouse is just about here. But we're going to talk today mostly about stuff that occurred in that area, which is between Staten Island, to Elizabeth and Morristown. And as I said, the British occupied Manhattan and Staten Island for almost the entire war. George Washington's out in Morristown at his headquarters. So it becomes an area for foraging, an area to test George Washington and his troops by the British. Another map. This is a cool map. The reason I have this on here, this is what we have we have National Park kiosks that we have put in the ground locally on the Forgotten Victory Trail. And this is one of them. This is in Millburn. We're going to put one in Springfield, Union, Elizabeth, all along the trail. But this is a 1781 map with overlays. And the red shaded area is the Forgotten Victory Trail area. This is British occupied Staten Island. That's Manhattan. Number 5 is Washington's headquarters, the Ford Mansion, and 6 is Jockey Hollow. So it shows you, the neat thing was, the 1781 map has topography. And it showed us the Watchung Mountain Range, which is going to be key. So it's very cool. So somebody mentioned Hobart Gap. That's going to be important. There's 2 ways through the Watchung Mountain Range for British troops if they decide to invade and get out to Morristown. One is Hobart Gap, which is up top, and the other one is Mordecai Gap, which is down in the southern part of the Watchung Mountain Range. And Washington picks Morristown particularly because it's behind this mountain range. He's equidistant, so from Morristown to Hobart Gap, which is where the Short Hills Mall is today. Route 24 cuts through. It's about 12 miles, and then it's another 12 miles to Elizabeth. So that Watchung Mountain Range is halfway between Washington and his troops and Elizabeth. More maps. We don't need to go into much on the map part, but I wanted to show you a modern day map. I put Westfield on here so you know where you are relative to this being the route in British code. But real quick, summary of things that are going to happen in 1780. January. I didn't mention this before. I probably should start with this. In charge of British troops is Sir Henry Clinton. So he's the North American commander. In late December, to just after Christmas, he's going to get on a boat with troops, and he's going to get out to Charleston. He wants to kind of separate the colonies by taking Charleston. He's going to take a bunch of his troops there, and he's going to leave a guy in charge named Kniphausen. He's a Hessian general, and he'll be left in charge. Now, Kniphausen has seen field battle throughout the war, but it's been a couple of years since his last engagement. He's kind of been sitting on his hands in New York as second in charge to Henry Clinton. He's going to look to test George Washington while Henry Clinton's away. So Henry Clinton, remember, he's leaving December 1779, he gets on a boat. While he's away, Kniphausen's in charge. So early January, Kniphausen wants to test Washington a bit. He's triggered in part by the fact that on January 15th, a little bit before this, January 15th, Washington tells William Alexander, one of his generals, Lord Stirling, he tells him, take some sleds and take 2,000 soldiers and attack Staten Island. So he goes from Morristown to Elizabeth, Lord Stirling, with these soldiers on 500 sleds in the middle of all these snowstorms and stuff that we're going to talk about. And they invade Staten Island. Unfortunately, the British got a heads up from spies, from loyalists, so they knew they were coming. So it was an unsuccessful raid by Washington's troops. In retaliation, the British start to raid Elizabeth. And they do it many, many times. The worst of it is January 25th, when they're going to burn the First Presbyterian Church of Elizabeth, which pastor is Reverend Caldwell. So they burn it to the ground. The irony is, the person leading and guiding the British to burning both parts of Elizabethtown and Newark simultaneously, the person leading them is this guy, Cornelius Hetfield. Cornelius Hetfield Jr. So the Hetfields have lived in Elizabeth for many, many decades. Cornelius is a loyalist. It's his own church that he burns down. His dad is a patriot, Cornelius Sr. So, it's hard to understate the loyalist rebel conflicts that occurred between families, between people in towns. So this is an example of a father being a patriot and a son being a loyalist. So that happens in January. And I think in part it's retaliation by Kniphausen for the raid that they did earlier in January, but also he wants to see how many troops Washington has behind the mountains. He really has no idea. Spies tell him certain things, but he's not quite sure. And then a few months later, a full-scale invasion will occur with 8,000 troops combined that will go from Staten Island into Elizabeth and on to Connecticut Farms. Does everybody know what Connecticut Farms is? Union? Okay. You know, Connecticut Farms, it surprises people, but if you read books on this stuff, like The Battle of Springfield by Thomas Fleming, people describe Connecticut Farms or Union as the Garden of Eden of New Jersey. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I live in Short Hills, but looking down my nose maybe. But Union's not exactly the Garden of Eden, but it was orchards. It was beautiful. It was stunning. Like hills and orchards and fields and crops, and it was beautiful. I think it was George Washington that called it the Garden of Eden in New Jersey. So keep that in mind when we're talking about it. But they decide to invade with a force, a large force. They're going to meet resistance. We're going to talk in detail. They're going to burn the village. They're going to murder, or accidentally, Hannah Caldwell's going to be shot, Reverend Caldwell's wife. But they're going to be unsuccessful. And these are going to happen while Henry Clinton's away and Kniphausen's in charge. Keep that in mind. So they'll wait a couple of weeks after Connecticut Farms, and they're going to try again. This time, Henry Clinton's back from Charleston. He's big and victorious. He comes back. He's not exactly happy that Nipphausen did this, because he had broader plans, but they go again and they try, and they fail and they end up retreating, but they burn, the significant thing is they burn both Union and Springfield pretty much to the ground. I like to include this because this is another one of those fun facts that you only discover if you dig a little bit. But there was a lake, a glacial lake. 10,000 years ago, there's a glacier. It recedes everything from Liberty Corner, New Jersey, up to Wayne. Behind the Watchung Mountains was a lake. It's called Lake Passaic, and it was 250 feet deep. And the remnants of it today are the Great Swamp. That's the only thing left. And it's important to know this because Washington chooses Morristown, because remember, he's a surveyor by trade, right? Early in his youth, he's a surveyor. He goes out to the Western Territories. He understands topography. He understands geography. And he picks this area in Morristown because it's defended by Watchung Mountains, Great Swamp. So they're going to have a hell of a time getting out there if you're British. Okay, Morristown, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but oh, I don't want to say this part. How many people do you think live in Morristown, in that area in 1780?
1,000?
5,000.
250. So imagine when Washington camps there, he camps there twice. We already mentioned after the 10 crucial days at the end of 76, 70, into 77, he camps there in Morristown for that winter, but then he's going to come back in 1779 to 1780. And he comes back in 1779 with 10,000 soldiers. So imagine you're one of 250 and you see 10,000 soldiers marching into town. And it amazes me. And he will ask Henry Wick if he can use his land. And Henry Wick was one of the largest landowners. And that's Jockey Hollow today, much of Jockey Hollow. Henry Wick, of course, related to me. Let's find this out. He's not a direct, he's an uncle. Interesting. This is where it gets really interesting. So Henry Wick is very benevolent. He's a patriot. He's part of the Morris County militia. And Washington offers to pay him for the use of his land because he's going to chop down trees for log huts. And Henry Wick's like, oh, no problem. I'm a patriot. Use my land. So keep that in mind because Henry Wick's dad, Henry Wick grows up on eastern Long Island in the area around Bridgehampton. And he ends up moving to New Jersey, Wick does. But his father and he grew up out there. Well, his dad is John Wick, not from the movie, but John Wick. And guess what? John Wick is the opposite of Henry Wick. He's supposedly a serial killer. He owns a tavern called the Bull's Head and Wick's Tavern. And legend has it that if you went into his tavern, like peddlers or people traveling, you wouldn't come out. And he buried them underneath the house. And there's other legends about him. He had an elderly enslaved man who worked for him, and he ordered him to dig a well, and the man was unsuccessful, so Henry Wick buried him alive in the empty well. Like, this is crazy stuff, right? This is my 8 times great-grandfather. But it just goes to show that from evil doesn't necessarily come evil, because Henry Wick ends up being a very large patriot. So that's one of those rabbit holes I went down. More about Morristown. You probably knew that it was a harsh winter, one of the worst on record in North America. 26 snowstorms, 6 blizzards. When I go into the schools and talk about this stuff, this is the part the kids love. And I always tell them, you got like a coating of snow and you missed school. Imagine this, 26 snowstorms. And then just some fun stuff down the bottom, like it was the first National Historic Park was was Morristown National Historic Park. This is where, Morristown is where Washington gets word about the French involvement of troops and Navy. And significantly, throughout his time in Morristown, Washington would send letters to Congress. And he would send letters to Congress because he hasn't been able to pay his soldiers. The Congress has not paid the soldiers. Food is in short supply. Conditions stink, right? So he's sending letter after letter, and also corresponding with Congress is his quartermaster, Nathaniel Greene. And Nathaniel Greene's writing letters, and they're telling Congress how awful it is. Well, Congress sends 3 guys in 1780. They're like, okay, we've heard, he's like a broken record. Let's send 3 representatives from Philadelphia to see how things are. Well, these reps come, this committee, they come and they kick the tires, they stay for about 3 weeks. One jumps on a horse, goes to Philadelphia and says, it's worse than he said. So it's just an example of how bleak conditions are. And word of these conditions is going to get to Knyphausen through his spies. Remember, Washington's got spies, the British have spies, there are loyalist leaders who have spies. We're going to see William Franklin being, the royal governor, he's got spies. So here are the key players. Now there's more people involved in the battles, but George Washington, you know about Nathaniel Greene, he was a Quaker from Rhode Island, and he's like George Washington's right-hand man. You hear about Benedict Arnold being a great field commander until he turned traitor. Well, Nathaniel Greene was the one that Washington selected as his successor. He's the one that Greene, I don't think, knew this, but Washington had indicated to others that Nathaniel Greene would be his successor should something happen to him. And Nathaniel Greene outperforms in everything he's given. So he's asked to be, at one point, he's asked to be quartermaster, which is a thankless job, especially with supply issues and no money to pay for supplies, and Congress not issuing pay. But he takes the job and he does a bang-up job. And he does whatever Washington wants him to do. And he will come into play because he will be left in charge at the Battle of Springfield. Washington will not be there, and he puts Nathaniel Greene in charge. Scott Shirley Maxwell, he was in the French and Indian Wars. He had accompanied Washington and Braddock, and when they did their Western campaign in Pennsylvania during the French and Indian War. So he's battle tested. He's a heavy drinker, hence the name Scott Shirley. He's great field tactician. He will be important at the Battle of Connecticut Falls. He will be on the front lines with his troops. Israel Engel, he's going to be important in defense of a bridge over the Rahway at the Battle of Springfield. His 2nd Rhode Island has been devastated, and they're left with 150 men at that bridge. Light Horse Harry Lee, everybody knows whose dad he is? Robert E. Lee. Well, Light Horse Harry Lee, he's got a Virginia light horse regiment that Washington loves, and he calls him up. He was down in South Carolina at the time. He calls him up because they're lacking horses, and he needs him. He comes up, and he's going to be critical at fighting that occurs at the Battle of Springfield in what's today Milburn and Vauxhall. I'm going to show you pictures of that. So, Light Horse Harry Lee, patriot. His son, not so much. But he will encounter difficulties later in life. Light Horse Harry Lee will end up, I think he gets sick, and then he has financial difficulties, and he abandons the family and goes to the Caribbean. And he dies before he sees his son, Robert E. Lee, for a last time. I think off the coast of Georgia. Okay, so the guys I just highlighted, they're American soldiers, American leaders, and they get along well. For the most part. There's always going to be trouble among the ranks, but for the most part, the Americans communicate well with one another. Washington trusts all of these men implicitly. The same can't be said for these 2 guys. This is, remember, North American commanding officer, this is Henry Clinton. Henry Clinton will be the longest tenured British commander in North America. He takes over for William Howe, if you remember that name. William Howe's in charge of troops early on. Henry Clinton's in charge. He's very secretive. He's kind of got an ego, and he never wants to take accountability. And you'll see why in a little bit. But he's in charge. He goes down to Charleston, Kniphausen, Hessian, about 50 years old, doesn't speak a word of English. So there's a translator for them. And I think what they did at the time is they would translate German to French, French to English, and vice versa. So they have a translator between them. You can imagine communications would be difficult between these two, as opposed to those Americans who all speak English, and also get along. The other thing I wanted to mention is Washington at times had trouble with some of his commanding officers, like Horatio Gates. You probably heard about issues with him. He had an ego. He wanted Washington's job. Charles Lee was another general who had issues with Washington being in charge. So he wasn't without his difficulties, and of course the war was ups and downs for the Americans. It wasn't all victories, trust me. But they all stuck together and worked well together. Behind the scenes are these gentlemen, and I call them the antagonists. And these are loyalists. These are American citizens, well, colonists, and they are taking the side of the king. The first is William Franklin. William Franklin, you know, he's the son of Benjamin Franklin, illegitimate son. He's the last royal governor of New Jersey. He's very much loyal to the crown. Well, he gets taken prisoner by the rebels, the Americans, and early in the war, he gets imprisoned, and while he's in prison, his wife dies of disease in New York City. So he's got a bone to pick when he comes out of prison. He gets exchanged, I think, a year or 2 years after he's in prison. And he gets exchanged, and he finds out his wife died, and he didn't get a chance to see her. So he's got it out for the American cause. And he will try and form this Board of Associated Loyalists. He wants his own army, basically. He wants to have his own little separate army other than the British. William Tryon, he's a brutal military leader. He's ex-royal governor of New York. All these gentlemen are in New York City, okay? They're all living there. And he does not get along with Clinton because Clinton was critical of his tactics. He would forage and burn villages for no reason. And so Tryon and Clinton don't get along. Robertson, he's also got aspirations to be Clinton, to be the head of the North American British troops. So he doesn't like Clinton. He's nicknamed Old Clip. Do you know why he's nicknamed Old Clip? Because he'd take coins and he would shave off of them to short you. So he would short you and keep, and remelt the rest. So he was called Old Clip. And the last but not least is this guy, William Smith. He's a lawyer. Originally, early in the war, he's kind of with the Patriot cause. But then he's asked to sign this Oath of Allegiance. George Washington implements this Oath of Allegiance requirement for citizens. And he refuses that. And then he's booted out of New York. So he gets peeved at that and becomes a loyalist. Now he lives 2 doors down from Henry Clinton in New York City during the war. And he plays both sides. He'll be friends with Clinton, but then he'll badmouth him behind the scenes. So all 4 of these guys have this in common. These are their principles. They feel that Henry Clinton and Kniphausen overestimate the size of Washington's forces in New Jersey. Sounds familiar. It sounds like George McClellan in the Civil War, right? Remember, he was the one that always sat on his hands because he thought the Confederates had more troops than he did? Well, they think that these gentlemen think that Clinton's the same way. He's overestimating. They also think that there's more loyalists than is evident in New Jersey. And as soon as they get a victory, the British, in New Jersey, the loyalists are going to come out. And they're going to be on our side. And the last thing they do is they underestimate the spirit of the rebels, the spirits for independence by the militia and the locals. So these guys will get in the ear of Knyphausen. And they will convince Knyphausen that while the boss is away, we should invade. There's these terrible conditions in Morristown. Now's the chance to strike. So, those are the antagonists. So they end up, I have a quote there from Abraham Clark. He's from Elizabeth, New Jersey. And when they signed the Declaration and New Jersey agreed to it, he was quoted as saying, "We are now embarked on a most tempestuous state." And that's an understatement. But Knyphausen decides to invade, and these are the landing points. Just so you know, there's Newark Airport, which wasn't there. But this is Elizabeth. This is the port of Elizabeth, right? So you're going to see pictures of it soon. But the British are going to land in two places, and they're going to make their way west. They're looking to get through that Hobart Gap. That's what it looks like today. So there's a park there called Veterans Memorial Park. The cranes weren't there, but it's a very nice area for picnicking and stuff like that along the waterfront. But they will land, they will come across on pontoon bridges. The other thing to mention, we're talking about June right now, June of 1780, but remember I was telling you about the raids in January of 1780? The troops marched right across the ice. The Hudson was frozen solid, like many feet of ice. The Arthur Kill was frozen solid, so troops just could march across, cannons could come across, you could drive a bus across the ice. So that was the January skirmishing. But here in June, they have pontoon bridges and boats. So here's the question I always ask. The British have now come across the Arthur Kill into Elizabeth. How does Washington find out about it? Anybody? How's he going to find out?
Spy network.
Spies is one way, right? You can get it through spies. Scouts, advanced troops. But signal beacons, right? So as soon as someone sees British movement, now remember we've got the Watchung Mountain Range. It's pretty high up, right? You could see, back then it wasn't as forested, so you could see from, let's call it Beacon Hill and Summit, which is where one of the signal beacons is, you could see Manhattan very to Elizabeth. So Washington instructs his officers to build signal beacons, and he builds 23 of them. Hobart Gap is up there, number 10. Washington Rock, if you know where that is, not the one down here. There's another Washington Rock, that's South Mountain Reservation in Millburn. So there were beacons there, and all along the Watchung Mountain Range, and they were as far south as over here. Do you know where Twin Lights Lighthouse is? Yeah. There was one there. That's about here, I guess. But there was one there. So they had 23 of them. And they looked, they were built early in the war, and then they got neglected, and then Washington had Reverend Caldwell actually work on improving them. And I've just circled here, this is the one that was in Summit on Hobart Avenue. And I just circled it on a map. But originally, the Watchung Mountains were called the Blue Hills, and that's what it would look like. So it's 18 feet high, log structure, 22 feet wide on the bottom, and they would put brush, twigs, tar barrel on top, and they would light this aflame. And they would fire off a cannon, and that would signal to Washington. Remember, it's 12 miles to Washington, 12 miles from Elizabeth. So that's kind of a life-size version. There's a scaled-down model at Reeves Reed in Summit, if you ever go there. And then there's a plaque. If you live on, or if you ever pass, if you come 24 and then get on Hobart Ave to go towards Summit, on the side of the road, and it was overgrown for a while until it was cleared, but there's a plaque that shows you where that signal beacon is located. That was signal beacon 10, and it's at 226 Hobart. And the funny thing is, I live at 123 Hobart in Short Hills, not Summit. And I get mail sometimes for 123 Hobart Summit. And so I got mail one time and somehow she got mail from me. She got my contact information, calls me. Oh, I said, you're at 123 Hobart in Summit. Do you know about the beacon? And it's literally like 5 houses down from this. And she goes, what beacon? So I told her all about the beacon. It's right down the street from our own house. So here we are in June. The British have landed in Elizabeth, and they're going to make their way west into Connecticut farms. But guess what? This is the thing about Henry Clinton is secretive, like I said. He likes to hint around things. He doesn't want to be on the hook. So let's say he has plans, and the generals that work for him, he instructs them. He kind of leaves it up to them to interpret what it is he wants them to do, because then he can say, oh, I didn't tell you to do that. So he's got in his mind, though, and later on in his memoirs and stuff, he's going to disclose this. But Henry Clinton had in mind an attack from 2 gaps. Remember, this is Hobart Gap. This is Mordecai Gap. So while he's in Charleston, he had this in his head. I want to do this when I go back. After I'm victorious in Charleston, on my way back, I'm going to drop troops at Perth Amboy, and they're going to go through Mordecai, and I'm going to instruct Nipphausen to go west through Connecticut farms in Springfield into the Hobart Gap. And I'm going to attack Morristown and capture Washington and his artillery. But again, he didn't tell anybody about this. So he's on his boat back after winning in May of 1780. So he's on his way back, and he gets to Perth Amboy, and he unloads his troops. Remember, the troops that are going to go through Mordecai are on his boat. Nipphausen's got the rest. He unloads the troops, but he gets letters from, he's been corresponding, Henry Clinton has been corresponding with John Andre, with this guy, Mr. Moore. And he gets letters from Mr. Moore that indicate, hey, West Point is in play. I may get to be commander of West Point, so let's think about what our strategy is. We might want to send some troops up that way. Well, Mr. Moore is Benedict Arnold. So, in the middle of this, Benedict Arnold plays a role, because he has sent letters to Clinton saying, I'm going to be, I've denied, I don't want to be field commander in New Jersey, and I've asked to be appointed to West Point. So if I get West Point, I'm going to hand it to you. So that changes Clinton's view of this strategy, and little does he know, Nipphausen has already jumped the gun and done this. And so the rebels are on high alert. So a lot of intrigue. And I always wonder, what would have happened, how would the outcome have been different if Clinton did this? If Clinton and Nipphausen had done this, I think Washington would have been immediately thinking. Because each of these forces was equivalent to or larger than Washington's entire force. So it probably would have been successful, in my opinion. This is boring. Don't look at the order of battle. This is just a list of the regiments that were involved. But I want you to look at the numbers. So this is approximate, but 1,500 American troops. This is between militia and continentals, and 6,000 British. So there's a 4-to-1 advantage. The thing to keep in mind, though, is as much as the British had an advantage in numbers, they're 3,000 miles from home. Are they motivated? Militia and the Continentals are protecting their own home turf. They know the landscape. They know where to hide behind a rock, in a house. They're fighting dirty. So I think all of those elements reduce that advantage by the British considerably. More maps. Just a highlight of this is the British are gonna make their way down what's today Morris Avenue, past Liberty Hall, and they're gonna enter Connecticut Farms. And the fighting's gonna occur at the base of the hill. We call it the defile, because it's kind of like the bottom of this hill, in Union, by the Connecticut Farms Church. And this is gonna be a map that we put on a future kiosk in Connecticut Farms, but, there's gonna be heavy fighting there. This is the route, if you want a modern map. This is, Suburban Golf Club, right here. So they come down Morris, make a left on Colonial, and they make their way over underneath what's today the Garden State Parkway, and they meet to fight at that spot. So this is why we call it the Forgotten Victory Trail. There's nothing there, right? There's nothing to see. There's no structure. There's no monument. It's a parkway entrance. And the kids laugh when I go into schools. And I show them this slide and I say, this is where the meat of the Battle of Connecticut Farms took place. And they're like, no way. I'm like, yeah, if you take a shortcut to go down the beach in the summer, this is the way you go. So, it's unfortunate. But this is a painting that was done of the Battle of Connecticut Farms. And they got it reversed because this is the American troops, they were actually up top. So the artist got it wrong. They were up top, shooting down towards, there's a branch of the Elizabeth River that runs through here, and the British were down at the bottom. That's what the church looked like early 20th century. That's it today. You've probably passed it. You know all about it. It's got a great graveyard in the back with a lot of patriot graves. So quickly, how are we doing on time? Okay. Getting there. James and Hannah Caldwell. You probably know so much about Reverend Caldwell already and Hannah, but I want to cover some stuff you may not know. So he was pastor at First Presbyterian Church, which is British Burn, right? He moves his family out to Connecticut Farms. They rent a parsonage down the street from that church we just saw. And they have 9 kids. 7 of them are moved out safely further west, and they actually stay with Hannah's sister, who's married to Stephen Day, who's one of my ancestors, and they move out to Chatham for safety, the 7 children. 2 are left behind because they're small, because Hannah doesn't want to leave her husband, her husband's possessions, and the fact that she feels safe because she's a pastor's wife, she's female, who's going to harm me. So she stays with a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old, and it ends up that the British, when they fight through Connecticut Farms at that defile, they're going to continue further west, and they're going to burn houses in the process. There's shooting going on, and her 3-year-old supposedly goes to the window to see all the racket outside. They're in the back room. And while he's at the window, she gets up, puts the baby on the bed, and is shot twice when she's at the window. And she's murdered, killed. There's debate over what exactly happened. But that becomes a rallying call for Patriot Citizens Militia. And it gets in the press. New Jersey Journal, which is Shepherd College's paper out of Chatham, publishes about the innocent Hannah Caldwell murdered. So it serves the purpose of making her a martyr and making her one of the major focal points of people that are patriots. Caldwell served as quartermaster and chaplain for the 3rd New Jersey, so he wasn't just a pastor who went and gave sermons on enlightenment principles and liberty and freedom, but he was also in the militia. He was wanted throughout the war. If I had to list like the top 3 most wanted on British lists, George Washington would be number 1. This is New Jersey. Washington, number 1. William Livingston, the governor of New Jersey, number 2. He writes very eloquently for the patriotic cause. He's very rebellious. And then 3rd would be Reverend Caldwell. So he's been targeted by the British because he's, as fervent patriot. He's supposedly, he goes, and when he gives his sermons on Sunday, he takes his pistols and bangs them on the pulpit. And what was the line? So he does that and he goes, "Let us give thanks." And he bangs it down. So Hannah's murdered. Reverend Caldwell was not there at the time. He was out towards Morristown with the Continentals. Washington and his soldiers will not get to Connecticut Farms till late afternoon. But there were advanced troops who confront the British. George Washington was not there during the battle. He will sometimes give sermons in Springfield, and that'll come into play later at that First Presbyterian Church. And this is a graphic designer did this for us. There were pictures of a Hannah Caldwell that have been widely publicized, and it ends up, I heard rumors that it was her great-granddaughter's pictures, because of course they didn't have photography. But this photograph kept circulating with Hannah. It was a great-granddaughter or something, so he took that and created this image, which is now Union County's official image of Hannah. Because it took that picture and said, okay, what would her grandmother look like? I don't know how it does that, but. And that's the parsonage in Union, if you wanted to visit. It's a museum. It has artifacts. They burned it after they removed. Neighbors convinced the British to help move the body out before they burned the house. But the original house was burned, and this is the rebuilt structure. And of course, since you're mostly Union County people, you know that they depict the murder of Hannah on the Union County seal. That's the only one in the country, only county seal that shows a murder. Did you see the one they had proposed? It stunk. It had an airplane over Newark, right? Or over Elizabeth. So I wrote letters to keep this. But the furthest the British will get, so they get past Connecticut Farms, they burn the town, Hannah Caldwell gets killed, and they make it as far as the east branch of the Rahway River. And that location today looks like that. So that's looking west. This is Morris Avenue. So looking west, it's right on the border of Springfield and Union. This is as far as they get. They face one cannon, Eliakim Little, who lives on Hobart Hill, is firing one cannon, a militia cannon, and there's troops, and they fight to keep the British from getting any further. It's late in the day, Nipphausen decides to turn around and go home. So these are images we've created to show you what Connecticut Farms may have looked like being burned. And this is the British marching through as they're burning it. In their retreat from that battle, there's this crazy storm that occurs that's depicted in a lot of the primary sources, and it says it was hellacial, like hail, rain, and thunder, and lightning. So that's the British retreating back to Elizabeth. They will retreat to Elizabeth, but they will not, for the most part, go back to Staten Island to where their home camp is. They will entrench for the next 2 weeks in Elizabeth. And it's important to know that besides these two battles that came within 2 weeks of each other, there's skirmishes in between in Elizabeth. Washington's troops are sent to harass the British in Elizabeth constantly. So for 2 weeks between battles, that'll happen. But this is an interesting quote. Nipphausen, a month after, so this is a month after Connecticut Farms and Springfield battles, he's writing to, this is the Secretary of State for Britain. He's in charge of all the war, Lord Germain. He sends him this note that says, basically, what those antagonists told me was completely wrong. So the citizens came out with high spirits, and the militia came out in force and repelled us. So it's basically saying, why did they ever listen to the loyalists? So flash forward 2 weeks, Battle of Springfield. Again, ignore the order of battle. I'm working on this to try and verify all of this, but this is the numbers that I have. It's 3-1 advantage now. And what I want you to know, where is it? Is it on this page? Oh, it's on the next page. So there's a 3-1 advantage numbers wise. I must have missed it. Where is it? Oh, okay. Did you know? So if you took all the battles in New Jersey that took place, remember that big map I showed you? Total combatants, both British and Americans, and you ordered it, rank ordered it. Number of combatants, highest to lowest. Monmouth would be number 1. Springfield, number 2. Number 3, I think, is Trent, and number 4 is Connecticut Farms. So 2 of the top 5 battles in terms of combatants were these 2 battles. And it doesn't get a lot of press. Monmouth gets a lot of press because they've got open fields that exist today. You can see where the battle took place. They've got a visitor center. So I just wanted you to know that 8,000 combatants combined is number 2 on the list of battles in New Jersey. And I wanted to show you where Bryant's Tavern is. Remember I said Nathaniel Greene is put in charge for his first independent command under George Washington is at the Battle of Springfield. And his headquarters is going to be at the intersection close to where Milford Ave hits Morris Avenue. And it was right behind the ShopRite.
Oh my gosh.
So where 24 goes behind here, the big 24, not 124, big 24 comes through there. It was somewhere probably in the middle of 24 on the overpass that goes from Morris Avenue towards Summit. But this goes to show more locations not in existence anymore. And this was an important place. This is where Nathaniel Greene held court with George Washington. And this, I put it here, I found the receipt online. This is the bill to George Washington for his stay at Bryant's Tavern. And it was 800 US currency at the time, which was probably worth like $15. Because there was so much currency issued and it was worthless. I think it was 100 US dollars to $1 specie, meaning hard coin. So inflation was crazy. But that's the receipt from that tavern. And this is approximately where the first Battle of Springfield in December of 1776 took place. This is a relatively small battle that took place. There's more to come on that. Does anybody go to the paper mill? Okay. Did you ever go to eat at what used to be it's the Standard, Milford Standard? Well, that was where Caldwell's quartermaster location was right there. So it was not that building. That building burned down, but this is the modern building. But this is where Reverend Caldwell has satellite quartermasters location. More maps. Oh, this is where I say it's more combatants in the Battle of Springfield than Princeton or Trenton, which get all the glory along with Monmouth. And the first Battle of Springfield, Westfield is going to play a major role in this in December of 1776, when the British are going to try and get through the Hobart Gap with a very small force, and they're going to be pushed back. And this is really the start. If you think about it, Washington's luck has gone poorly. By December 1776, he's been beaten at the Battle of Long Island, Fort Lee, Fort Washington. He's retreated through New Jersey, so he's down on his luck. And if you read historical records, they'll say, oh, well, it turned around at Trenton. Well, I would argue, when they repelled the British here, and this is 1 week before Trenton, so December 17th, 1 week before Trenton. And this is the first successful repelling of British in New Jersey during the war. So I think this might have been a turning point where spirits rise. And then Trenton is awesome because he kicks the Hessian bugs there. And then he continues at Princeton a week later. So this might have been the start of it all. And Westfield was involved, the militia from Essex County. More maps. They take the same route for the Battle of Springfield that they did for Connecticut Farms. So they're gonna go past the defile in Union. This is where the Connecticut Farms Church is. They're gonna go past where they burned Hannah Caldwell's house, and they're gonna go down Morris Avenue. But this time, they have a little bit different strategy. And remember, Clinton's back, and Clinton and Niphausen's in the doghouse, because he jumped the gun 2 weeks earlier, and now they're on high alert, the rebels. But they decide to take a two-pronged attack in this area, and the right flank is gonna go down Vauxhall Road, and the left flank is gonna go directly down Morris into the center of Springfield. And all along the way, and this is where I should probably go back to this, Nathaniel Greene's strategy is a good one. He knows the British are coming from here, from Elizabeth, and as they're coming out, he needs to make sure that he buys time. He's got reserve troops coming from Morristown, because the beacon has been lit. They've been alarmed to come to Springfield, but it would take time. He needs to delay. So he sets a number of positions where he's just going to have his soldiers do a fighting retreat. So fight, do irreparable harm to the British, slow them down, retreat. Fight them again at the next bridge, retreat. So that's what this is. It's a series of fighting retreats all along these two routes. Okay, so there's the route, there's the split, and they're going to have to, the British will have to traverse the Rahway River in two places. This it would have been a lot higher. The water would have been 3, 4, 5 feet deep. And Nathaniel Greene's orders to his troops are, as you're retreating, pull up the planks on each successive bridge to make it harder for the British to cross. And some British will attempt to cross along the cross beams, like balance beam, and they'll be shot to shreds on the other side by Russian Continental soldiers. But many of them will go up river a little bit or down river and wade across. But the Rahway is important. So remember I said there's a two-pronged attack, one down Vauxhall Road. So if you know where Staples and Five Guys is in Vauxhall, like the Milburn Mall, yeah. So at the intersection of Milburn Ave and Vauxhall Road is a bridge. And on that bridge are plaques, and this is where that guy, Lighthorse Harry Lee, fights against the British, a number of British loyalists, Queen's Rangers, and regular British soldiers. So he is defending this, Lighthorse Harry Lee, against the likes of John Graves Simcoe. Anybody know that name? Yeah. Did you ever see that? There's a miniseries on AMC called Turn. Yes. Washington Spies. Do you remember the bad guy? Yeah. That's John Graves Simcoe. He fought here against Robert E. Lee's dad, which I find amazing. And he successfully slows them. And simultaneous to this fighting, we'll be fighting in downtown Springfield. So this is right flank. The left flank is on Morris Avenue. And this is the Washington Rock that's in South Mountain Reservation. And it wasn't, Washington was not on that peak looking out during the battles. Between the battles, perhaps, but he wasn't on location at either battle. He came to Connecticut Farms after the devastation, so in between he may have been at the lookout, looking out over Springfield, the surrounding areas. But there's a plaque up there if you ever hike in the South Mountain Reservation. And this is the furthest the British will get going down Milburn Avenue. So remember, the Lighthorse Harry Lee and his troops are retreating into the center of Milburn. By the deli is a bridge. There was fighting at that bridge by the Milburn Deli. And the furthest the British will get is Town Hall, Milburn, which is about a block away west. And this is as far as the British will get, because what do they see? So if you're standing, if you know Milburn Ave, and you're at Town Hall, Dunkin' Donuts right next to it, if you're looking west towards the Hobart Gap, what's on either side of you? Well, one side you see mountains. right? The short hills. And further up, you're going to see the first Watchung Mountain Range and the second behind it. And up on the hills, General Matthew and John Graves Simcoe would see artillery, they'd see militia. So they would have to run this gauntlet if they wanted to go any further towards the gap. They would run the gauntlet, and they would decide not to do that. And they would bang a left on Main Street and go down to Springfield to meet up with Niphaussen's main army in Springfield. So, furthest they get, there's a rock with a plaque to represent the furthest the British will get. And in the process of going down Mulgrave, they passed the Hessian House, which still exists. This is where two Hessians supposedly hid in the attic. At the same time, there's fighting going on at that same bridge that I told you they stopped the British at Connecticut Farm. So this is Morris Avenue. This is that same bridge. It's the east branch of the Rawway. And the fighting here, and this is wild. This is a marker. And that marker, which is on a side street, you can see the bridge in the distance on Morris. But that has the marker to Israel Angle, who he's in charge of the Second Rhode Island. And his men, he had 160 men who had fought in every major battle so far in the Revolution. They would hold off 2,000 British. There was 1 cannon for the Americans, 6 cannon for the British. And he successfully delayed the British from coming across there so that reserves could end up on the hills of the Hobart Gap. More maps. This is the downtown Springfield part I wanted to show you. So fighting occurred downtown. If you know where Springfield Library is, this is the church. There's a little Revolutionary cemetery here, Battleground Cemetery, and the fighting occurred all along here. And there's a little stream that runs through there. You can't see it today, but that's the west branch of the Rawway. And fighting at this stream was Israel Shreve, this very portly commander of the 2nd New Jersey Continental Regiment. And he successfully delayed things at this river crossing. That's the Springfield Church. There's a plaque on it. And that's where famously, Gibbon Watts, everybody knows that story. Okay, so that's where he went to get wadding for the soldiers. Israel Angle, that Rhode Island guy with 160 men, he needed wadding for the soldiers to put into their rifles because they were running out of it. And he ran in and grabbed hymnals by Isaac Watts. That was the composer. And he brought those out and started tearing pages up, and that's why they call it Gibbon Watts, because Isaac Watts was the author of those hymnals. That's why. And that painting is in Francis Tavern, which I would suggest, if you want to see a cool tavern, Francis Tavern is very cool. It's in New York City, down by Wall Street. There's the Springfield Church many years ago. There's an artist rendering. There it is today. So you've probably seen it. Now that was burned, remember, so that's a rebuilt one. Cannonball House, that's a nice museum. Its hours are very erratic, so you have to call to be able to go in it. But there's a cannonball that was found in the house from American fire, which was embedded in the west side of the house. So we know that it was American shells that were found, and that was a hospital for British troops. It was one of only 2, maybe 3 houses that didn't get destroyed by the British when they burned the town. So this was one of them. Okay, going way over here. That's the little Battleground Cemetery, which is hidden amongst the bushes. That's what it looked like years ago when there wasn't as many trees. And so the Battle of Springfield will end up being the last major fighting, land fighting, in the Northeast. Now remember, I said Cedar Creek happens later, after Yorktown, but that's much less troops. This is the last major land battle in the northern United States. Does everybody know the bread oven ruse? I threw this in here.
No.
No? Okay. Do you know where, okay, you're at the Short Hills Mall, and there's the Summit Municipal Golf Course. You know Canoe Brook has two 18-hole courses. Right next to it is Summit Municipal Golf Course. Well, that's where ovens were built by George Washington. George Washington was very stealthy, and he decided, before he marched his soldiers down to Yorktown in 1781, he's got his soldiers in Morristown marching towards Chatham. They decide to encamp, and he has the French soldiers, who are now part of the fighting, build French ovens for bread on the municipal golf course of Summit, which wasn't back then. It was just, whose land was it? Timothy Day's, one of my ancestors. But the Day Tavern was right down the street, which was the centerpiece of Chatham. That was the place everybody went. So he hasn't built these ovens because he wants to trick the British, who occupy Manhattan, into thinking he's going to attack New York. So he has them fire up these ovens to bake like they're baking for 10,000 troops. And it works. It works because in the middle of the night, Washington and his troops silently march out Kings Road in Chatham and make it down across the Delaware, headed towards Yorktown. So they're across the Delaware before the British really figure it out. So there's these bread ovens. This is it on the map. So there's the golf course, there's Canoe Brook, South Course, North Course, Chatham, downtown Chatham's here. So there were ovens there. They can't find any traces of it really, but they did find I think a sword and a cannonball. So that's a cool story. And then I wanted to, why did I target it? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I don't know why we're in that one. Hold on. My bad. My bad. Hold on. I don't know why it switched to the Harding. I just did Harding Township. Hold on. I got Westfield size lines.
What was the Washington Motion Road Trail?
Well, that was, they marched, and I'm not really allowed to talk much about that. I've been told to stay in my lane on that.
That goes through West.
Yes, it went through Westfield. So the Allied troops marched through Westfield and other towns on their way to Yorktown. So that was on this. And I think it's well marked. There's good maps. There's great stories about Lafayette.
There's a website too.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going here. Sorry I'm delayed here, but for some reason Westfield slides went up. I must have picked the wrong one. Come on, do the right one this time. Ah, there we go. Okay. Gallows Hill, everybody knows about that? Okay, so we won't skip it, but this is important because this relates to the subsequent murder of Reverend Caldwell. So not only did his wife get killed, but then he gets shot by a sentry in Elizabeth while he's escorting, I think he's escorting some goods, and a young lady, friend of his, friend of the family, he's escorting her, and there's a disagreement with the sentry, and the sentry shoots him. And that sentry is James Morgan, and he's hung very close to the spot. And I think they just tore down the tree that he was supposedly hung on. I think the person who owns the land mistakenly chopped down the tree.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. The Miller Corey house. The thing I want to highlight here is Samuel Miller, who owned the home, who built the home. His son was part of the militia, and he would have participated in that first battle of Springfield, which I told you about was December 1776. And he was also involved in Elijah Little's unit, which was combating the skirmishers, the foragers. So he was a patriot in that regiment. And that's his military pension. This is the tax ratables for Samuel Miller. There's more to come on this in a few weeks. There's going to be a presentation by Rob Wendell on all of the houses in Westfield. And I'm going to show you a slide in a minute. So there's Westfield and the first Battle of Springfield. And this really just talks about the advance of the British and how the militia came out to fight and how there was cattle and stuff stolen by the British. And then recovered by Westfield people. So I just wanted to highlight that they were involved in both battles of Springfield. And then the plundering of Westfield, you know about that? In the retreat from the Battle of the Short Hills, which was the one that was down, I told you, on Plainfield Golf Course and Metuchen and those areas. After that battle, the British were victorious. Well, it was kind of a draw, I guess. They retreated back towards Staten Island and they came through Westfield and camped for one night. And they did considerable damage. They plundered houses throughout. They did about 8,000 pounds worth of, 9,000 pounds worth of damage to Westfield residents. They also occupied the church, the First Presbyterian Church. They stole the bell. They put cattle and slaughtered pigs inside the church. There was all kinds of depredations by the British. And I included this because of the rabbit hole. I'm looking at all this and I see this guy did damage claim in Westfield. He was a resident, Samuel Robertson, and he ends up, he was my wife's 6 times great-grandfather. And he's the one that donated or sold his land for the first Presbyterian church in Westfield to be built. So that's his grave, there's the church, he's buried in here. But there's cool records on damage claims. Unfortunately, all these damage claims that were made to the Congress, none of them got paid. So the total of, 92 households were plundered in Westfield and none of them got remunerated for the damages. The British, to be honest, did a better job of compensating loyalists who had their property seized by the Americans. And the way they would do that is they would allow you to move to Canada and get land. And last but not least is William Clark. Has anybody ever heard of him? Okay, William Clark is a resident of Westfield. He's the last known survivor of what's called the Sugar House, which was this infamous prison in New York City. And it was called the Sugar House because the warehouses that were sugar warehouses, like Governor Livingston, the Patriot, he had a sugar warehouse. And his sugar house during British occupation of New York would be used as a prison. And this goes on untold, but the prisons in New York City that housed American soldiers, they were awful conditions. They were like Andersonville was in the Civil War, where they weren't fed, there were rats, mistreated. It was awful conditions in these sugar houses, and the prison ships weren't much better. They were actually worse. There were ships that the British converted from fighting vessels to prison ships. And I think something like 50% of the prisoners on those ships would die of disease. So this guy, William Clark, was the last known survivor of the Sugar House prison in Manhattan. And I found his pension, this is him, he signed his pension warrant to try and get money. And fun fact, the last fun fact, he lived to be 97, by the way. So he lived a full life. He's supposedly the last survivor of the Sugar House. In 1852, this guy takes the boards and the beams from the Sugar House and he carves canes for all the surviving prisoners from the Sugar House. So this guy, William Clark, would have gotten one of those canes and he cherished it for the rest of his life. It was made out of the wood from that prison, the Sugar House. This is, not many people know about these prisons, but there were more, I think there was a whole lot of people that died in these relative to losses on the battlefield. I mean, it was less than losses on the battlefield, but a whole lot of people lost their lives as prisoners. All right, I'm almost done. This is a list of just some of the people in that graveyard that were in the revolutions, patriots. This is the event I was talking about, where Rob is going to talk about houses in Westfield that are from the Revolutionary era and prior. And it's April 9th at 7:30 in the community room at the Westfield Municipal Building. I'm almost done. Recap. Battle of Springfield and Connecticut Farms, part of the Forgotten Victory Trail. Hannah Caldwell's murdered or killed. Towns are burned. It's the last fighting that will occur in the northeastern United States during the American Revolution, the last large land battle. Washington is quoted as saying, "The militia in New Jersey during these battles flew to arms universally and acted with a spirit equal to anything I have seen in the course of the war." So, in 1780, he's saying, these guys came through. The militia came through. He wasn't expecting this, because they hadn't always performed. The New Jersey militia hadn't always come out in force when called. And in this case, they did. Whether it was due to Hannah, whether it was due to their own towns being burned, but they came out in force. And one last plug, if you've never read about Benjamin Rush, he's one of my favorite revolutionary heroes. He wasn't he was the Surgeon General for the military, and he was an incredible individual. And I'll just give you a couple of highlights. He was an abolitionist. He was an advocate for public schools. He was friends with all the founding fathers. He really wasn't a politician, but he fought against epidemics of smallpox in Philadelphia. He told Thomas Paine to call his document Common Sense, because he read a draft. So Thomas Paine wanted feedback, he went to Benjamin Rush. What else? He's the father of American psychiatry. He was one of the first and only people to say, that guy that's mentally ill, he's not possessed by the devil. He's got physical problems. So Dr. Rush was one of the first to advocate for psychiatry as opposed to someone being possessed by the demon. But last and most important, I think, is he was friends with Adams and Jefferson, who of course didn't really like each other after the elections that occurred between them and all the bad press and infighting. And they didn't speak to each other for years. They refused. They hated each other. And Benjamin Rush wrote each of them letters and corresponded between them and said, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson is your old friend and he helped you found this nation. He's the spirit of liberty, blah, blah, blah. And he would do the same for Jefferson, and he brought them back together in their letters to one another. They get together, Adams and Jefferson, and they write these poignant letters late in life. They die on the same day, right? In 1826, July 4th. 1826, on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. But these letters that Benjamin Rush made them write to one another is incredible. So if you read something, read the biography of Benjamin Rush. He really was this philanthropic catalyst for the revolution. And that's our website if you want to. These are the kiosks that I mentioned that we put out with maps and descriptions, because so much of this is urbanized and there's no battlefields and there's nothing to really show what happened. But that's it.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
early on you talked about a battle on Long Beach Island. You listed it as
Yeah.
Long Island. Do you know what town that was in?
No, but if you look up,
Barnegat Light.
it's in Barnegat Light. That's where the marker is. Yeah,
Okay.
Barnegat Light. they
Okay,
say.
thank you.
I've been there, but I couldn't remember what town. Is that on the south?
No, that's
North end,
far
north
north.
end.
Far
North end, by the inlet.
Yeah.
By the inlet, right. Yes, sir.
Union and Springfield didn't exist as entities back then.
That was not till 1857.
Is it really more accurate to call it the Battle of Connecticut Farms that did exist? Or because it ended in Springfield?
So Connecticut Farms was a village, kind of a very small village,
Or Battle
which
of...
would have been part of Elizabethtown
Yeah.
proper,
Yeah.
which then you had Springfield next door.
How did it get the name Battle of Springfield? Because it stopped there?
Well, the Battle of Springfield incorporated what's today Milburn, Springfield proper, parts of, what else was it? Parts of Summit, a little bit of Summit, on the northern end. Yeah, so it would have incorporated, it would have encompassed a much larger area,
I see.
Springfield. But Connecticut Farms was what's today Union. Yes, sir.
Early on your slide, you had a number of Patriot generals or commanders. Where did they learn their tactics? Because you said some were great
Well,
tacticians.
The enlisted men learned their tactics at Valley Forge from von Steuben, who was a general brought in by General Washington. And von Steuben was, I think it might have been Prussian. He was in the Prussian, you know, you had all of these, you had these fights for independence in Europe in 1848. Remember the French had a revolution in 1848, the Prussians and the Polish. And after most of these fights for independence failed, those generals or people in the military there would try and find gigs somewhere else. Some of them would move to the United States, and then they'd be asked to participate in conflicts. Like I went to a Civil War here. Yeah, sorry. That's my Civil War hat. Civil War had a lot of commanding officers coming off of revolutions in Europe. The American Revolution, Benjamin Franklin introduced so many great people to George Washington. Lafayette was on the recommendation of Benjamin Franklin. Von Steuben was on the recommendation of Benjamin Franklin to George Washington. So they would get their training from people who were in combat or fought in the French and Indian Wars. Remember the French and Indian Wars were about, 20 years prior? So that's how they would, but they were fought guerrilla style for the most part, which threw the British off. The British learned their lesson a little bit later in the war, and when they went into towns like Springfield, Connecticut Farms, they would have advanced troops on the vanguard on each flank, because they knew they were going to get pot shots from behind rocks and in houses. There was all kinds of that, which is one reason they would burn towns to the ground in frustration, because here were these militiamen, riflemen, pot shotting them from every different which way, and that was their revenge, and frustration from not getting further towards the Hobart Gap. Any other questions? Yeah.
Was John Wick the father of Tempe Wick?
Henry Wick.
Oh, Henry.
Henry Wick, the owner of what's today Jockey Hollow, much of it. Henry Wick's the father of
Of
Tempe,
Tempe Wick. Okay.
and the legend of Tempe Wick.
Yeah.
Henry's dad was John Wick,
Okay.
the one that was a serial killer.
Right.
Anyone else? Yeah.
How did they house and feed that many troops? I mean, 8,000 people is a lot of people to feed.
So the first time around, the winter of, the end of 1776 into 1777, those battles of Trenton and Princeton occurred. And Washington decides to encamp in early January in Morristown. That first encampment is most of the officers and a lot of the soldiers are put up in houses. The only real encampment I know of was at Loantaka. You know where Loantaka is? That's on the border of, I guess it's Chatham and Harding
Yep.
and Madison. It's a park. Well, Loantaka was where we think that one of the encampments was. But they were mostly housed in houses, and they essentially got word from William Livingston, who's the governor of New Jersey at the time, that you need to put people up. If Washington comes to your door, or an officer comes to your door and says, "We're staying with you," they're staying with you. So they put up in houses that first winter. The second winter is when they built the log cabins at Jockey Hollow. And there was significant building of And as far as food, it was difficult to come by, but again, they made it mandatory that farmers give a certain portion of their crop to feed the soldiers. They would, they would try and compensate them with continental currency, which was kind of worthless. And some farmers would balk at that, but they'd have to do it in the end. So, anybody else? Yes, sir.
I grew up near the bridge between Springfield and Union, used to play in the woods there, and my brother found a cannonball
Really?
in the woods, you still have it.
They're-
It's a cannonball.
They want to do another, they're gonna replace that bridge, by the way. There's plans to replace that bridge. I guess it's now been a while since that bridge was repaired. And I think in the process, they're gonna do some more archaeological stuff in that area. I don't think they had much success the last time around with finding much. So maybe it was all the kids got it wrong. But you would think, it's all wood, it's woods, you're right. So, anybody else? Well, feel free to check out the website and contact me if you have any more questions. But go out and see some of these places. I mentioned a lot of places, but the ones up here, you can visit the parsonage, Caldwell Parsonage, Cannibal House, Morristown, of course, has great stuff. But there's so much to see. And there's plaques on the side of the road.
Is the Presbyterian Church in Elizabeth next door to Snyder Academy?
Yes, yes,
So
and that was
they
rebuilt
it.
also.
Okay.
And that's another thing to mention, there's so many towns that are doing 250 celebrations. Elizabeth has grand plans. It's hard to attract tourism to Elizabeth, honestly, and I'm part of like the 250 committee over there, and it's hard, but there are so many great sites, Boxwood Hall, First Presbyterian Church and Churchyard. And we have a group of old descendants that the 250 Elizabeth committee has formed where anybody who lives anywhere in the country can come and get a behind-the-scenes tour of these historic houses, the graveyard, and there's going to be celebrations at the end of October. There's going to be a dress ball in period costume. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on. And I'm sure Westfield has the same. You've got Rob's talk in a few weeks. So, that's it.
Please come to Miller Quarry too, which is right down the street.
Yeah. So, well, thank you. There's too many cool things to cover. Thank you.
Excellent job.
Okay. I put a